I mean, I think men, we like trophies, right? We want to go kill something and hang it on the wall.
Yeah.
We want to go buy the boat. We want, whatever it is, however we define success. And I think sometimes we can get so lost in pursuing, even providing for our family, that we forget that our first responsibility is actually to provide ourselves.
And welcome to another episode of Marriage Matters. This is a podcast where we talk about marriage matters because marriage matters. So as I said last week, the whole month of June is dedicated to fathers. And as you can see, I have a father. I'll say we're talking about manhood and fatherhood. So I have a man and a father sitting right next to me. This is my friend David Rials. He's pastor at Life United, Lake Charles, Louisiana. So I want to thank him so much for being with us here on Marriage Matters.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. So looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So I've actually really enjoyed. I've been fellowshipping with you guys a little bit here the last few weeks, and it's like Life United has become kind of a second home for me. He and his wife Dara, they're just so wonderful, and I just appreciate your hospitality.
No, we had you and Tanya come and be a part of our marriage conference earlier this year.
Yep, I forgot about that.
Q&A with you guys, so that was awesome.
So that, you know what that means, huh? That means you and Dara both have to come on. Okay. You beat her here, but we got to get both of you guys on.
We can tell you a lot of what not to do.
That's more valuable sometimes than what to do. Sometimes,
Oh yeah.
So like I said, we're talking about fatherhood. I think this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I think it's a topic that we need to have more conversations around. Mm-hmm. Something that my wife and she's been telling me this. That, fathers are important. She grew up with her biological father not really being in her life. But luckily there was a man, her uncle, who really stepped in and served in that role. And as we talked about 2 Sundays ago, we've both had other men in our lives that have stepped up and stepped in and served in a fatherly function at some points in our life. And I always say, I believe that God gives you or sends the men into your life that you need for the seasons that you're going through. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I guess the first thing, I just want you to kind of tell us a little bit about your family.
Okay. Yeah, so me and my wife have been married for 18 years, and so we waited 12 years to have kids, which everybody just assumed that we couldn't. And it wasn't that we couldn't, we just didn't want to yet.
Nothing wrong with that.
So we waited, we've been married for 12 years, and so today I have an almost 7-year-old son and a 4-year-old girl, and they're dynamically different. My wife jokes that my daughter is me in a girl body, and because she's fierce and ready to take on the world. And but my boy is, I changed my life. The moment he was born, I just never experienced anything like it. And so I love my kids. They're amazing and different in the same ways. And so my son's the builder. He's intellectual. He's just the engineer. And so he's always wanting to build something, take it apart. How's this work? Which I'm that way. So we have that bond. And and so me and Dara have now been married for 18 years, coming up on 19 later this summer. And so, that's kind of our family. And, son's in school, daughter's on her way. So
that's awesome. So you had the boy first.
Yep.
Girls, okay. Was there, how did, I know, you had your son, and that probably was like, all right, yeah, son. When your daughter came, how did that change you as a father?
They're totally different.
Okay.
Like when my son was born, you always think you're ready, like in everything. You think you're ready to be married, you're not. You think you're ready to be a father, you're not.
Yeah.
But it was a really, I had a very profound experience when my son was born. Because I feel, and it's the only way I know how to put it into words, is I feel like every relationship in my life I had learned to love. Like I learned to love my family. I learned to love my sisters. I learned to love my wife, right? I didn't just love her from day one. I fell in love with her. I learned to love her. And I remember having a moment when my son was first born, Dara's on my right, having just delivered him, and then they've got him under the bun warmer or whatever you want to call that thing. And they're wiping him off and clean. And I'm looking at her, like making sure she's okay. And I looked at him, and I just kind of had this like crazy like moment. I don't even know how to explain it. But it was like that I loved him in a way that I don't know that I'd ever loved anybody.
Wow.
And it was like everybody else I had learned to love. And him, I just had this crazy intense love for the moment I saw him.
Wow.
And I wasn't expecting that at all. And so that kind of took me like, it was just this, I don't know how else to even put it into words, but it was just this crazy cool moment. Just kind of meeting him for the first time. Because I mean, obviously being a guy, my wife's pregnant. She's like, oh, you should feel the baby. And she's like, and I'm like, I just don't feel what you feel. But it was like everything she'd been feeling for 9 months just like unloaded on me in like 2 seconds.
Wow.
And so, and so it was really this crazy experience for me. And then when my daughter was born, it wasn't quite as profound per se, and maybe because it was my second, but it was still this very different experience. I had this like very protective thing kick in, you know? And I don't know if that's just her being a girl. I don't know definitely what that, but with him, I didn't feel like that. I think with him, I felt this responsibility to raise a man. And with her, I felt like this responsibility to protect a woman.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe that's the best way. I don't even know how to put it into words. And so it's just very, I mean, they're almost so different that I can't compare them in a way.
When you were talking about the first time you saw your son and you immediately just knew, I love this kid. I always say this, that, and I know there are some people who maybe choose not to have kids or maybe can't or whatever, but I always say, for me, I could not understand the love of Father God until I became a father. And I think what you just described there that's how God loves us. And I know that's small in comparison to how God loves us, but still you get this, okay, I understand that kind of love now. Because like you said, before then I had to learn to, I wasn't born loving my wife. Like you said, I met her and, that happened over a period of time. And even the love that I have for my parents, I love them, but it was, be honest, a lot of times it was conditional based on how I felt and how they were, treating me or correcting me at the moment. But you're right. It was like with my kids, and I tell them this all the time. There's nothing that you can do. There's nothing that you can do that will make me stop loving.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even having kids has maybe made me love my parents more. Because I think I understand some of why they did, or and even though I still have younger kids, I think I understand my parents a little more. And so I look back maybe in, just kind of the rearview mirror, and I'm like, I get it a little more now. Yeah, and so
absolutely. And I tell my girls that, I said, hey, I'm telling you this now, that you're not going to get what I'm telling you or we're trying to do. Some of this you won't get until you're probably 25, maybe even 30 years old. Because I said I didn't understand what my dad and my mom was trying to do. But yeah, you're right. I get it now. Yeah. And so I do. I thank them. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for making the decisions and being a brave parent, and not, even though I was upset, I didn't want to always do what they said. I wanted to do things my way, but they always know better. So yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first thing I want to kind of talk about as it regards in regards to fatherhood is your relationship with your father. So what was that like, and how did your father shape or play into the father that you are today?
Yeah. So my dad was a traveling salesman, and so he was in and out. He was probably gone 30, 50% of the time growing up. He sold equipment to the oil patch, and so he traveled a lot with that. And so in some ways, I had and I don't mean this as a negative, it's just kind of factual. In some ways, I had an absentee dad, just in the sense of he just wasn't there all the time. And so I had times where Mom was kind of leading and running the house, and then Dad would kind of come in, and so like the dynamics would change, and just that kind of coming back and forth. And very thankfully, both of my parents are believers, and so they're Christ followers. And not to say they were perfect, far from it, but I knew that they loved us, even though sometimes I maybe questioned the way they showed it. but I knew that they were trying.
Yeah.
There was effort even in their mistakes. And both of my parents were really good about owning their shortcomings and even saying things like, I'm sorry. And so even though my dad was gone, and I don't really know if this was his decision, if it was my mom kind of prodding him, or if they just kind of fell into it. One of the things that my dad did with me, especially in kind of my more formative years, was we had times where me and him would get away. And so our thing was going fishing. And so me and him would do that. And we didn't get to do it just a ton per se, but it's still something that me and him love to do to this day. Yeah. We still love to fish together. And so, I did that a lot and some of my most fond memories with him as a kid is actually on those fishing trips.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't about the fishing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was just about time it was just me and my dad. I had 2 older sisters. And so when we're home, I'm the youngest of 3. And so when we're home, it's just kind of like everybody, right? Like the attention's got to go around, but it was that time in the truck, or, I remember this one, and it was I was probably like maybe 12 or 13. My dad stopped at one of our favorite little barbecue places on the way to one of our fishing holes, right? And so he orders just a brisket sandwich, right? And they're pretty good size. And I'm probably like 12 or 13, and he just ordered one. And so he's not paying attention. He's driving home, and he looks back and he was like, hey, where's the rest of that sandwich? I'm like, rest of that sandwich? And he's like, you ate that whole thing. And so I think he realized that, hey, I was growing up and my appetite was enlarging. And then even as I got into my kind of teenage years, and really it's kind of crazy. Me and my dad had a pretty good relationship until I started serving the Lord. Because I didn't really start serving Jesus until I was really after my junior year of high school. And I'd gone to college after I graduated high school, really because he wanted me to. Because my dad being a salesman, he said, I want you to have options that I've never had. And my dad never went to college. And in his mind, me going to college would give me opportunities.
Yeah.
But I had this call on my life in the ministry.
Yeah.
And and my dad loved the Lord. It wasn't that he as a dad, he wanted me to have some options that he just never had.
Sure, yeah.
And so during that season, for about 18 months, I went to college because my dad wanted me to, and I was only there because my dad wanted me to. I didn't really apply myself the way that I should have. And I'm still serving in the church, still loving Jesus. I mean, I'm kind of just figuring out what that means. So it's kind of this unique dynamic in a way that I started serving the Lord, and then my relationship with my dad goes kind of sideways. And after about, I think it was 3 semesters of college, like we got to where we weren't talking.
Wow.
Like we'd be sitting this close at eating lunch, not talking at all. I mean, not a word.
Wow.
Because we're both just angry and just frustrated with each other. Like he's saying, you're not applying yourself. And I'm like, and you're making me do this. And it's just kind of a bad deal. And then one day he asked me, he just said, son, he goes, what do you want to do? He's like, because you're not really applying yourself. You're, and I told him, I said, well, I feel like God's calling me to the ministry. And he was like, well, what does that look like? He said, because I can't just not let you do anything. You got to do something. I need a plan. And I said, well, which thankfully, I guess in a way I had a plan. I was like, well, this is what I feel like the Lord's telling me to do. And so he was like, okay. And, and so that was really to some degree, started the repair of our relationship a little bit. And my dad's he's always been a huge supporter, but it took navigating some pretty challenging moments during that, because all my dad had been raised was, you just go to work. I mean, I come from just a family of just extraordinarily hard workers, like everybody. My granddad, my uncle, uncles. I mean, it's just, you just show up and go to work. And so that's all my dad really knew, and so he was doing the best he could from where he had grown up. And not that, he has his own story of where God's blessed him tremendously and, all these things, but my story looks different than his story. Yeah. Right. And so, but trying to navigate leading me to what God had for me without trying to predict what that looked like. And I think he had to navigate that. Yeah. And then really kind of releasing me and trusting me and the Lord to, which was tough. And I didn't understand it at the time, and I'm more and more understanding it now. And, and there was a lot of really good things that I learned from my dad. And again, I don't know if my mom made him or what, but, like just give you an example, every man in my family was angry. Like we would just fly off the handle. Even as a young kid, I remember I would get angry and just have this anger I didn't know what to do with. So I'd punch a wall, I'd punch a tree. I broke glass, punched through windows and stuff, just like, and it's kind of funny, in a way, because we'd say, oh, all the men in our family are not emotional, but they would all fly off the handle in anger and rage. Yeah. And so, but I remember my best guess is I was probably around 9, 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And my dad started saying things to me like, David, you can be a better man than me. Wow. But you've got to make a decision. And he would tell me things, even as a kid, because I'm looking back on it now, I'm like, I don't know why he thought I knew what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. But he would tell me things like, it's a lot easier for you to fix this now than when you get to my age. Yeah. If you'll start working on it now, you can break this. This is a curse in our family. Mm-hmm. And he just kept, and it wasn't a one-time thing. If he told me that once, he told me 100 times. He told me and just kept saying it until I believed it. Mm-hmm. Like that this, who I am is not who I have to be. That's good. And that I had the ability to change it if I would allow the Lord to help me. Mm-hmm. And so my dad just kept kind of putting that in. And then when he would lose it, even if it wasn't at me, even if it was at my mom, he would come and say, hey, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I blew it. Like I shouldn't have lost my cool. I shouldn't have said that. And I apologize. And he would remind me, you can be better than me. You can change this. Yeah. Which is kind of an interesting dynamic, because now that I have a son, I look at it as my dad was the first generation. I'm the second generation. Mm-hmm. And we're both believing that my son will not know the effects of that curse. Wow. But it's taken us generations to get there. Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes I think even from a spiritual perspective is that we're kind of nearsighted. Even in change, like there's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Mm-hmm. Well, somebody had to be the first. Yeah, absolutely. And then it can continue, and we want to pass those legacies down, and we don't have to just pass down negative legacies. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe the history or your past maybe is that negative. So do something about it. Yeah, and just say, look, I may not be able to break all the way through, but I can get the baton further than it is today. Yeah. And then when I raise my sons or I raise my daughter, is that, hey, they don't have to live, but I think that takes some humility and honesty on our part to kind of own the negatives and just say, hey, it can be different. And so I think that's something that I really have a ton of respect for my dad in. Yeah. It's just that he at least acknowledged it and just said, hey, there can be a better future. Yeah. Absolutely. And, so
that's good, man. And man, I just got so many things now. Just that what you said there. The first thing that stuck out to me was the statement that your dad made, which I think is the hope and prayer for every father. Is I want you to have options that I didn't have. Mm-hmm. And actually, I was just talking to a friend of mine at lunch today about how I think about some of the things that I've done and the sacrifices that I've made and maybe working at a job maybe I really didn't want to work at, so that my kids maybe had more opportunity than I had, and hopefully, like you said, we're moving the baton, we're moving the needle forward. Yeah. But the other thing, you talked about how you made a statement. You said we always say men aren't emotional, but will fly off the handle. And that's one of the things that I really have been trying to work with any guy that I counsel with or I coach with, is teaching men how to have a healthy sense of their emotional, or have better emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, and how to process emotion. So I guess my question is, why do you think fear is kind of like, when you think of men, for most men, not fear, but anger. I'm sorry. Anger is like the one that most men have down. Yeah. And we know how to get angry, but everything else, and it just all comes through the vein of anger. Why do you think that is? And how can we do a better job of processing through that to become more emotionally intelligent and aware? Yeah.
In some ways, I think it's the most socially acceptable. Okay. It's just kind of like if a man gets angry, like that's what they expect. Okay. And so it's almost, to some degrees, I think it's, I'll say it this way, like as a boy, like men don't cry. Yeah. Well, okay, so that tells me that's not socially acceptable for a man to show sensitivity, weakness, however you want to define that. Mm-hmm. But if I want to show you my strength, then I can, so in a sense is that for me to be emotional is not strength. For me to be angry is strength. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that somehow maybe culturally we've been conditioned for that a little bit. And I think too, some of it is, because there is a righteous anger, like there's a right way to be angry.
Sure.
But I also think that in some ways, in the negative sense, is that anger is actually just misplaced passion. And we don't know, maybe, and I think I think anger does come from fear. Because no man wants to be found out as a fraud.
Yeah.
Like that you don't have what it takes, that you can't come through. We all want to be the hero of the story, right? And anytime that we feel like that maybe we can't be, won't be, might not be, it's like almost like a muscle spasm, like we kind of freak out. It comes out in anger a little bit. But I think that really us trying to, because I think most of men don't know what to do with their emotions. There's, I can't remember what book it was, but it's like there's these stages of a man's life where you're the boy, you're the adventurer, you're the warrior, you're this, you're that. And I remember the concept that was said is that no man is ever out of all of those stages. Like there's still a boy inside of every man.
Yeah.
There really is.
Yeah.
And I think that's why every man still wants a father.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter. I'm 42. When I'm 62, I will still long for the presence of a father, whether it's my biological father or just a man who's further down the road than me, is that we want that, and in reality, we need that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even, as you were opening up, I had the thought, is that, whether you have your biological father or not, I think to put the weight of fatherhood on one individual is kind of unfair. And so, like, even though I have a great relationship with my dad today, I was just with him on vacation last week, right? We have a great relationship. We really do. I respect my dad. I love my dad. I'm very thankful. And I realize that's maybe not the norm. But even my dad, which in many ways is a hero to me, couldn't do it by himself. Yeah. Like there still had to be other men in my life to come along at those certain seasons, men that would speak in my life. And, I'm a Christian today because of a man who was a youth leader who started talking to me about baseball. Wow. He didn't approach me with Jesus because I didn't want to talk about Jesus. Yeah. But man, he was so instrumental because he just showed up at that right season, that right time, and he became the bridge that led me to another man who really started helping my spiritual formation. Yeah. So he's talking baseball with me, but it led me to a different relationship that really started some spiritual formation that led me to other relationships that helped me along that journey. And so I think that there's, and kind of coming full circle to going back to your question, is that it was that relationship with that spiritual person that really brought me to the realization that he was like, hey, when you get under stress, you kind of start freaking out and you start being really short with people. And my anger started coming out, but I could hear it from him. And that's what's interesting is I think there's times that we can't hear wisdom from our own dad. Wow. Yeah. Even though our dad's saying it, and we all know it's like, oh, the older we get, our parents really get smart. And I think there is truth in that. But I think there's times where, it's no different than our wives, right? Like our wives, like, I told you that a dozen times. Yeah. Just because your buddy over here said it one time, he's a genius, And sometimes it's just hard to hear from those close to us. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that there are some, and anger, it does come more naturally to a man, I believe. And I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just saying I think that's kind of for most men, of course we can stereotype and say, oh, all men are, well, anytime you say all anybody, right, it's not a true statement. Correct. Yeah. It's not all the time, every time. It never is that way. But I do know that, and I've had to have the Lord really help me learn how to, like even just acknowledge like, hey, I don't know what to do right now. Yeah. And as men, we don't like to say that. Yeah. Like, I don't have the answer. We want to be the dude. Like, we want to be that guy. Yeah. And so having to learn how to kind of have that emotional intelligence you were talking about. Yeah. And just that emotional maturity to be vulnerable and to say, whatever situation, whether it's with my wife or, however, even with my kids, to say, hey, I don't know the answer. But even as a spiritual person, to turn to the Lord and say, hey, that's something I'm praying about. I don't have the answer yet, but the Lord's going to give it to me. Yeah. Because I want my kids to know that Dad doesn't have it all, but he knows where to go to find it. Yeah. And if anything as a dad, I want to do that with my kids, is to lead them that, hey, I don't have all the answers. Yeah. Because if I have all the answers, what happens if I'm not here?
There you go. Yeah, yeah. My guest last week, he was saying that that's one of the main goals for him was to teach his daughter. He has 2 daughters as well, but he was saying to teach them how to think and how to make decisions. So I thought that was really great. But going back to you said I say it's the V word, vulnerability. That's an area that I really had to challenge myself in because of that. I was thinking that in order for me to be a man, I can't show weakness or I can't show. And what I was really doing was I thought that that's what my wife wanted. She wanted this. She wanted the hero. She wanted someone to save the day. And that's not what they want all the time.
Right.
And the more I found, the more vulnerable that I became with my wife, not only my wife, with my kids, that the closer we became, because I'm letting them into an area that's reserved only for them. And there's not a lot of people that get to see that side of me or that part of me. And so it really helped me. And when I had that wall up, it was really hurting our relationship, and I thought I was the man.
Right.
I'm the dragon slayer. I'm the one that goes out and conquers for this family.
Yeah.
But the frustration of sometimes failing at that and not being vulnerable enough to share that with my wife was really driving a wedge between us because she knew there was something wrong, and of course she would ask, "What's wrong?" And of course my answer was nothing.
Yeah.
And so that that's an area that I really had to work, especially, I live in a house with 3 other ladies, a woman and 2 young ladies. So that really, that was foreign to me, and understanding the whole thing of, emotions. I had to really ask God to give me a crash course.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, is even like what we define as hero as a man,
that's true,
is different than what our wife or our daughters define as a hero.
Yeah.
I mean, we got all the little sayings, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. You got all these contrasts. But even what I define as winning in my life, in my marriage, in my family, with my kids, I mean, I'm sure what my son defines as me being the hero and what my daughter will define me being, they're going to look very different.
Yeah.
I mean, my son wants me to build Legos. My daughter wants to paint my fingernails.
Yeah.
It's very different. It's a very different world.
Yeah. I totally agree. It's like, we need to find out, what it is what do you need me to be?
Yeah.
What do you need from me? And not automatically assume,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think men, we like trophies, right? We want to go kill something and hang it on the wall.
Yeah.
We want to go buy the boat. We want, whatever it is, however we define success. And I think sometimes we can get so lost in pursuing, even providing for our family, that we forget that our first responsibility is actually to provide ourselves to our family, to our wife, to our kids. And it can become a pursuit of, and there's nothing necessarily wrong in those things, but there is something wrong when I pursue those things at the expense of my family.
Yeah.
Because more than anything, they need me.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I'm even wrestling with because my kids are still younger. And I'm probably more aware of that with my daughter than I am with my son, in the sense, that contrast is, I don't want her to go looking for a man because I wasn't there for her. And even though she's really young, I'm already very aware of that.
Yeah.
Of like, I want to be present in her life.
Yeah.
And I want to be present for my son, but maybe for a different motivation and a different reason.
Yeah.
But it's that, like, I've got to be present and I've got to be there with them.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm really kind of processing through and thinking about.
Yeah. That's a good segue into the next thing I want to talk about. But I always say this, the Bible says, what profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? And I said, well, the Glenn Coleman version of that is, what profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his family?
Mm-hmm. And men do it all the time.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So
it's almost celebrated too, by the way.
It
almost.
It is.
Which is sad.
And again, we're out slaying the dragon, but what if that's not, they don't want the dragon?
Right.
I want, well, let me just go into this. So one of the things, I saw this, I got this from your Facebook page. I was being nosy. So I went and on your Facebook page, it says, "Son of God, husband, father, friend, and pastor. That's who I am." Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really awesome, and even the way you ordered that, and so I just want to talk about those roles, and how has each one served you. How do you prioritize or balance, if we could use that word, those things in your life? Because being my dad wasn't a pastor, but I had a lot of friends whose dads were pastors, and unfortunately, one of the things that ring true for a lot of PKs is that the church took my dad, or the church took my mom. And even, growing and working in ministry, I never wanted, I can remember there was once, I think like one of the girls, they were graduating from kindergarten or something. And so it was the same night as our midweek service. So I'm like, I need to go to your graduation because I don't want her to, you're not more important. There's nothing that's more important than you in my life, So just going to talk about that, how do you balance all of that and how's that been for you?
I'm figuring it out, number one, or I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But I think order matters. Like God blesses order. He doesn't bless chaos. And so I need God's help. I need God's grace. And the order is, before my function, I have to know who I am.
Okay.
And so that's why I'm a son of God first.
Okay, yeah.
And if I'm going to be a good father, I got to be a good son. And I can only really learn, I can learn things from my dad, but my kids aren't me. And so my dad needed to be a certain dad to me. Well, I have to be the right father to my kids. Well, what if my son or daughter is just completely opposite from me? Well, I need the help of the Holy Spirit so that I know how to father them, to lead them into what God has for them. Well, but that all comes from my identity as a son first, right? And so I am a son of God. I am a husband. I am a father. I'm a friend, right? Even beyond that. And then becomes my function, my call, if you will, as a pastor. Well, that's down the line. And I think when I become pastor first, then as you were just saying, I've put my function as my calling, and I've placed that even above. And I've seen this happen a lot. It's just something I've just kind of always tried to be very mindful of, and I've not done a good job of it, and I want to be better, is I don't want my calling to be more important than my primary calling. Because I think, especially as somebody who maybe has a little bit more of a visible, whatever you want to call it, is that I can actually prioritize that visible calling over the private calling. But I do kind of wonder, like, what's God going to ask me about first? Like, is he going to ask me about what happened within the church walls, or are you going to ask me what happened within my house walls first?
Wow.
And that's something that really challenges me, because by nature, I'm a doer, I'm an achiever, I want to, and so we always run to the places that we're applauded the loudest. And that's actually something that I'm trying to shift right now, even in my own mind, is I've been celebrated for my work ethic for years, for decades. And it's like, but maybe that's not the thing that I need to be focused on. And maybe I need to actually really shift into, hey, I'm not the guy that just makes it all happen, but I am a good father and I am a good pastor, but not at the expense of my kids. Like, just kind of practically speaking, like, one of the things that I have endeavored to do is that, like, my desk at the house, whether that be just a desk in a spare room or even an office at my house or whatever, is that door is never off limits to my kids. Is that what's happening in that space is not more important than them. And I'm trying to navigate that, where I'm faithful to the church and I'm faithful to the Lord in that sense, which that's even an interesting thing. Faithful to the Lord is not in my ministry. Faithful to the Lord is in my relationship with him.
Yeah.
And then my marriage, because I don't want to sacrifice my family on the altar of ministry and call it faithfulness.
Yeah.
Like, that's not faithfulness.
Yeah.
It's not biblical order.
Yeah.
And so I'm really endeavoring to keep those things in priority, and I think that there is a bit of and this is kind of that part of that adjustment that I've been talking about is that I'm also a business person. Like I have business outside of the church as well. And just realizing like, man, I'm just being pulled too much, and knowing when to say, okay, I've got to pull back, and maybe I can't give as much time to this, or I can't give as much time to that. And somebody years ago, I asked them, it was another minister that I'd asked, I said, man, your wife loves you, your kids love you, the ministry's rocking. You're like, how do you do it? You know, because I feel like I'm just failing all over the place. And I said, you know, and I asked him the question, I don't even know why I asked him. And I said, is balance found in the day-to-day, or is it more seasonal? And he said, man, that's a great question. And he said, the only thing I would say is about your question is I wouldn't encourage you to seek balance, because it's not really a balance. You're never going to find level.
Yeah.
He says it's a tension to be maintained. And he said, for me, in my calling as a pastor, he said, there's seasons of my life that the church demands me more. And then I need to recognize those seasons when the church doesn't need me as much, and give my family that priority. And so that's really become my target, my goal, is to realize like, hey, there's an ebb and flow to the church life, and there's also an ebb and flow to my family life, because I'm because of the way I was raised, just nose to the grindstone, just stick with it. Yeah. And I'm having to learn to like listen to my wife more, and where she said, hey, the family needs some of your focus. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, let's just put a date. You know, like right now it's June, right? Well, I mean, we just got past Easter, kind of the business of church life. I'm like, okay, we're going to take a family vacation. I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to not, kind of leave the office a little earlier, and just trying to be more intentional about that. And then even when I get home, being present, not just kind of, oh, I'm exhausted, let me go hit the couch and, what's on TV that I can be distracted with. Just say,
your family they don't deserve the leftovers of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think I'm trying to, and I say trying as in, because I'm not where I want to be. Sure. Is that I want to develop, I want to grow, I want to be better for my kids, for my family. Because, my goal is I want my wife and kids to love me in 20 years. Yeah. I don't want them to, I don't know, this may, if you have some religious bones, I don't want the church to be my affair or to be my adulterer, right? Yeah. Like, I don't want her to be the girlfriend on the side. And I don't want my kids to feel like that. Yeah. I want them to know that dad prioritized us. Yeah. And I want my wife to know that. And I've not done a good job. And I think I've gotten better, which is good, but I want to continue to develop that, and so that's a big deal for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I would like to suggest I think the book is called The Balance Myth, or The Myth of Balance. It was Myth and Balance. And I read this book, and it was basically saying that there's always going to be something in your life that may not get as much attention as the priority. And he talks about that, how you have to be able to understand what season you're in and what's demanding your time. And, I always use this example when Tanya went back to school to get her master's degree. It's like I knew that 2 years was going to be, she was not going to be available. She was going to be not an absent mom, but a distant mom. She was going to be a distant wife. But we knew this is 2 years, which is going to, in the long run, benefit us as a family. It's going to impact more people, all the benefits that came with that. But we knew for these 2 years, that means that, I'm going to have to step up in some areas, and it's going to put strain on me. So I'm going to have to, and the girls were younger, so I'm going to have to make sure their clothes are ready for school. I'm going to have to do all these things that normally I wasn't doing, just to make sure that the balance, everything stayed in, so I'm operating at 70%. She had to go down to 30% as it concerns the household, so we could still stay at 100%. Yeah. So that's really good. What do you think are some indicators? You talked about listening to your wife, but what are some other indicators that you use to know when it's time to pull back or when it's time to push on the gas a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you get the answer, let me know. No.
That's what I'm asking you.
No.
Oh, wise one.
I don't know about that. I'm just a guy trying to figure it out. I think, like even here recently, I've noticed like my son, wanting more affection from me. Just coming up and like more hugs. And that's an indicator to me that he needs me. You know, like, hey, I'm running to the store. My son's like, Dad, I want to go with you. Just to ride, just to be in the truck with me. Like, this is kind of a funny thing. I've noticed that my son wants to ride in my truck, not my wife's car. I don't have an answer for that other than he equates the truck to Dad. And there's maybe something, and not that I'm not making some stereotypical statement here, but that inherently there's something about that truck that's just more manly, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I think it's probably because you're in the truck.
Right. And if he's in the truck, I'm in there.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
You know, and so I think that there are, you know, so that I think that those types of things, even my daughter is like almost overly affectionate. Like she's just like, I love you, I love you, I love you, which tells me like her love language is probably words of affirmation, you know, where my son's is probably quality time. He wants that, like he loves when we build something together. Yeah. You know, Legos or whatever. He really enjoys that time. And I think some of that's it's FaceTime that, you know, of course he's funny because he's like, you know, here's the manual, you find the parts and I'll build it, you know, kind of thing. And I'm like, that's kind of cheating, isn't it? And, but I think with my kids, I think that's part of it. I think for me, it's hard for me to acknowledge when I'm tired. And part of it is, I mean, I have a pretty high motor. I don't really get tired. So there's things like just a kind of a simple practical thing. Like if I catch myself walking in a room and then I'm like, why did I walk in here? Because that's not normal. Usually, I mean, I'm 3 steps ahead of myself. But if I walk, you know, or even like I pick up my phone, I'm like, why did I grab my phone? Like I know I was doing this. Like I'm mentally tired. Physical tired is different than mental tired.
Absolutely.
I can get over physical with sleep. Mental tired needs like downtime, needs rest. And that's not something that I do well. But I think those are just natural indicators. Usually when the pressure comes on, I mean, I had a friend with the Hurricanes. We were kind of all at dinner. It was me, him, and his pastor were all there. And he made the statement, which in a way was like a compliment in a way. And but then the more I thought about it, I was like, I don't know if that's, like, I took it as a compliment in the moment. The more I thought about it, I'm like, I don't know if that's really a good thing. But he was telling the founding pastor of the church that he serves at, he's like, oh, you know, this is David. He's my buddy. You know, he's down here. We were talking about the hurricane stuff. And he kind of, because I was just sharing a few things that we had done, this and that, we've been involved with through the hurricanes. And my buddy, who I've known for well over 20 years, he goes, David thrives in this environment. Like in chaos, David thrives. And it really, and he meant it as a compliment. I mean, he really did.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. Yeah.
But it even made me kind of do some soul searching a little bit. Like, do I create chaos? Do I create instability? Because I can thrive in that, like, you know, and I think sometimes even that, why do men want to go out to the barn? Why do men always want to do something? It's because we don't want to sit and actually have to deal with us. And so we distract. We don't engage with our wife. We don't engage with our kids because we don't want to deal with ourselves. And so we run away because it's easier. And so it really kind of created this, you know, because I mean, I like to sprint, but the problem is that sprinters don't run, you know, thousands of meters. They run, you know, less than 100.
Yeah, yards.
You know, yeah. You can almost count the steps. I mean, you know, they run in seconds, not in hours. Well, life is not a seconds game. Life is an hours game, and you know, years and months. And so here recently I heard something that really it really convicted me. And it's something that I'm really processing through and thinking about right now. Is he was talking about how we talk about, you know, you mentioned seasons a little while ago. Like, hey, with Tanya, hey, we got 2 years of a season. Yeah. Well, my season doesn't have an expiration date. And my season has just been run hard and run fast. And I was listening to this leadership thing, and the guy talked about seasons, and he said, well, at some point you just have to acknowledge that it's not a season. You just like that pace. And it really was just like, ooh, like, I didn't like that statement. Because I like to be, hey, the guy that just runs hard and fast. But it's like, at what point and at what cost? And so I'm like, I don't want to wait until something until there's really negative consequences to say, hey, maybe I'm not doing this well. Maybe I need to reevaluate. And so why don't I take some time and take that introspective time, which is hard for us as guys to admit, but we need it.
Yeah, sure.
And I think we need that rest. I mean, even like, like I said, I was just on vacation this last week, right? And so I've had a couple people even make comments. They're like, oh man, like my wife Sunday, she's like, you were more funny than normal. And I'm like, I don't know to take this as a compliment or to be insulted. Like, I think I'm a funny guy, but the fact is I was just off for a week.
Yeah.
Kind of unplugged, I mean, and so was I more rested than normal? Probably. In reality, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we need that time. And even though that may not come natural to us, just because it's not natural doesn't mean it's not necessary. And so I think we have to really process through that and just realizing to be at our best, we do have to rest. We do have to unplug. We have to find those places and those people that rejuvenate us. I mean, I think there's people that are fillers and there's people that are drainers. And so we got to find people, I mean, I love being around you just because of your laugh, your smile, like it's infectious. It adds value to me. Right. And so, but there's other people that I get around that they taken. They're not givers. They're not adding to. And so even being aware of like, hey, who am I putting myself around?
Sure.
Because and we need to give out. We can't, just always be just taking and taking in, but we can't always just give out because we'll be giving out of an empty tank.
Sure.
And so even like, hey, who are you talking to? Who are you fellowshipping with? Who is encouraging you? Who do you call in your bad days? Who do you call in those moments? I mean, I have friends that are just hysterical. And like on my bad days, I'll just call, not for anything, but I know they're going to make me laugh. And I may make that phone call before I go inside the house. I may take the block and just take that phone call just to say, hey, man, just how you doing? I mean, just say, we're just going to be guys. We're going to laugh. Just so that even if I've had a rough day at the office, I might need to take a few moments.
Sure, yeah.
Before I go in and engage with my family. So my wife's like, where you been? I'm like, I was on the phone. Well, it's because I'm trying to be a better husband and I'm trying to be a better dad. And I just need that moment. Maybe it was stressful. Maybe there's whatever's going on. And I just need to laugh a little bit so that I can bring some joy into the home, not my burden.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes as men, we can do that. We bring our burdens home versus like separating that, which is challenging. Everybody's got to figure out what that space is. I had a guy one time tell me, he said, when I get home, my wife knows I'm going to come in, I'm going to go straight to the bath. Because I need to separate work and family, and I need that space. And he said, they all kind of just know. I'm not going to be real cordial. I'm not going to be, hey, go. Like, he's like, I need my time just to separate that.
Yeah, sure.
And I think as men that we would do well to find out what works for us.
Yeah, my wife, she always says that about your coming home routine. And she's like, if it's, when you take your key out of your pocket and hang it up, that's like, okay, I'm hanging up the work, the day, everything that, and that resets. So she always talks about that. How do you reset, coming home? And there's a couple of things you said that really stuck out to me about, really not taking the time to reset, rejuvenate, because it forces us to deal with us. Why do you think that's a kind of a scary thing maybe for a lot of men? Or what do you think that is?
I think sometimes men are, number one, no one has shown us how to do it well.
Okay.
Like something that I'm trying to figure out, process through right now in my own life is like the whole idea of a Sabbath, like taking an extended time off. Like the idea of taking 2 weeks off to me is just crazy. I'm just like, but we're talking like 4 weeks, 6 weeks. I just met somebody who's on a 7 week and I'm like, what? Wow. Like I can't imagine. Like I had a buddy of mine who did a sabbatical here, I don't know, maybe into last year. He took 6 weeks off. And I'm just like, dude, I would feel like a worthless piece of skin. Wow. Like, because I get value from accomplishing. And I'm just like, he's like, man, I would have said the same thing 6 weeks ago, but I'm telling you, and I'm still like wrestling with the idea. And for one, I don't think it's celebrated. And I think maybe, at least for me, I can't speak for everybody. For me, I equate rest with laziness. And rest isn't laziness. Yeah. But in my mind, there's some sort of connection that I've got to get through to be able to really, and it's not celebrated, and it's, I think we probably ought to cut ourselves more slack and to a certain degree, not overestimate our own value at work, at the church, at here, at there. It's like, man, there's kind of been this, I love quotes and stuff. And, and so even like take it into like the work world, church world, whatever environment you may find yourself in, and it's a phrase, and it just says the success of my leadership is not determined by when I'm here, but rather by when I'm not. And so even for me as a pastor in my world, in the church world, if the church falls apart because I left for a week, I've not done a good job leading. I've not done a good job empowering people. I've not done a good job. Like I've created an environment where I'm the guy, but that's not healthy and it's not sustainable. And so if the job or the project falls apart, then I've actually not been a good leader. But on the flip side of that is I should be able to disconnect and say, hey, I've put it in the, Paul told Timothy that go find faithful men who are capable and empower and train and release them into what they have. And so I think one of the things that I'm challenged with right now is like the thought of who am I inhibiting from stepping into what God has for them? Because, and so that's really kind of like, oh, shoot. And the Lord kind of prompted me. And when I say the Lord, I had this thought. Whether it was the Lord, I can't say.
That sounds like a proverb someday.
I know. But I really had this thought is like, for me as a leader, and you can apply this in business, you can apply this in the church, you can apply this in a lot of areas, even in my family. But like, this was probably, 6-9 months ago. The Lord I think it was the Lord. I can't say absolutely. But I had this thought one day and I was like, what if when I stand before the Lord, He doesn't ask me what I did with the gifts that He gave me? But what if He actually asked me, what did I do with the gifts around me in others? Like, what if that's the criteria of standing before the Lord? And I'm still processing that. And I'm just like, if that's the standard for even as a father, a husband, a leader, then I am responsible to make my wife flourish, to see that she flourishes, to see that my kids flourish, to see those that the Lord has put under my care, to see that they flourish. Because if they flourish, I flourish. But I think sometimes, and maybe it's selfishness, maybe it's ego, maybe it's whatever, is that we have that concept or that idea of that, I've got to be who I'm called to be. And it's like, yeah, but if I make everybody else around me who they're called to be, I think I'll figure it out. Yeah,
that's good. And the other thing I kind of hear you saying that keeps coming up for me is, you said it, I think we go where we're valued. So do you think maybe we need to change our definition of value? Because for me, and of course I love the applause. Who doesn't?
Everybody does.
But when my daughter lays on me, we're watching a movie and she lays on
it's a chick flick. Go ahead and say it.
Yeah. Well, actually, my daughters don't they're really into Marvel.
Oh, you're blessed. You're blessed.
And my youngest, she's like the Stranger Things, and she's all into that kind of stuff. But for them to just lay there and say, "Daddy, I love you," that to me, over the years I've come to value that way more.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe it's just us calibrating ourselves to what does value really mean for us.
And I think just even as you're talking about that, even the idea of like not just where we are valued, like because people value us, but maybe even thinking about where do I add value, like the most value. Like you can only add. There's a certain value that only you. There's not another man on the planet that can add to your daughters. And so that value is even more heavily weighted than maybe your value in another arena because it's heavier over here. Like you're the only dad that your girls have.
Yeah.
And I'm the only dad to my kids. And so that's heavier weighted than maybe my function, my calling, my role, whatever. I'm the only, I pray that I'm the only husband that my wife will need and will have. Because I don't want to fail her. Well, I can be a pastor to everybody else and be a horrible husband. Which one's more important? I've only got one wife.
Yeah.
So it's heavier, it's more weighted over here.
Yeah.
And so I think I've got to look at it, and I would advise men to do the same, is where are you adding value, not just where you're celebrated. It's easy to go where you're celebrated.
That's good, man.
It's easy to.
That is good.
But to really lean into the place that says, man, where am I adding and bringing the most value?
That's really good. So in wrapping this up, we got about 5 minutes. I want you to just speak to dads out there and just to remind them or inform them, for some that maybe not know, what's the importance of a father?
Yeah. Well, I think the number one priority for any dad, and obviously I'm a pastor, and so I'm always going to go to Scripture.
Sure.
But I think the most important thing that we get from our Father, being God, is our identity in Him. And that's a pattern that we see. And so the most important things that we're ever going to give to our kids is their identity. And this was kind of my dad's maybe pet name for me. Growing up, and I've kind of adopted it with my son, is he would always say, like, my boy. Like, I wasn't just a boy, I was his boy. And it may seem kind of trite, trivial, flippant, whatever, but even as a man, I've never questioned whose son I was. I always knew I was my dad's son. Like, I'm Jerry's boy. And I think as a father that we give that to our kids. And I think it is something unique to the role of a dad, is that we give our kids value, but we also give our kids their identity and who they are. Because if they don't know who they are, they're going to go look to find out who they are.
Absolutely.
And I think and I believe that's something that God has given to as a father to help our kids shape their identity. And it doesn't mean that we get to identify them necessarily, but we get to help them identify who God has called them to be, designed them to be, gifted them to be, and help lead them into that. And so I do believe that as fathers is that we have a responsibility to pray for our kids. We have a responsibility to speak the word of God, the life of God, the destiny of God over our kids, and never undervalue the words that you say. I think a lot of times, Tanya can speak this way better than I can, but just father wounds, right? Well, most father wounds are words. Well, if words can be devastating, words can also be constructive, and they can build up. And I've seen this with my dad, even the older that he's gotten, the more that he speaks. Like, I watched him when my son was born and my daughter was born. He began to almost declare things over them.
Wow.
And I think because he understands the power of his words more than he did when I was born. And so even for you dads, understanding that your words are powerful. And sometimes even in our frustration and our anger, it's best just not to say anything. Because our words can wound and words can build. And so sometimes it's just taking a step back, and maybe it's just like, hey, I can't have this conversation right now. Even though we want to, be the disciplinarian, and we need to be. I mean, our kids need that structure. They need that authority, but really doing it. Because it's, my wife tells me all the time, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. And I'm like, well, I don't care what I say, but tone matters.
Yeah.
And so I know for me, that's something that I've really tried to be very careful of, because I'm a communicator. That's my primary gifting. And so I can be real quick with words. But really, like, okay, I need to temper it. I mean, Ephesians talks about that and says, fathers, don't be too harsh with your kids, or you may actually push them away. And so I'm really endeavoring to live that scripture out, is to say, hey, my words need to be seasoned with grace to my kids so that they can receive them, and to not do it out of frustration or anger, and really lovingly lead them even when I'm frustrated. And so I just encourage you guys, is that you have the Spirit of God on the inside of you. If you don't, there's a relationship with God, and He's the ultimate Father who teaches us and leads us to be the fathers that we need to be for our kids. And so that we can actually help propel our kids into their destiny, not kind of be a roadblock to it. And the Lord will help you to do that and to walk that out. So.
Well, man, that is awesome. And so we'll wrap this up. I just want to thank you so much for being with us. Real quick, if you want to let people know how they can follow you or get in touch with you, or tell them about the church? Or,
Yeah, so it's Life United Lake Charles. We've been pastoring here for 3.5 years, and so pretty much on all social media platforms. You can just search my name, David Rials, and then there's a podcast out there. You can search Life United Lake Charles. It's pretty much available everywhere you get podcasts. It's my personal podcast, but it's got the church name on it.
Gotcha.
And so if you ever want to check out a message or something, you could do it that way. And, look forward to start putting out more contents on social media. But that's some of the ways, that you can find us. So.
Okay. Awesome, man. Well, thanks again. And look forward to having you and Dara on. That's going to be awesome. So thanks for watching this week. And like we always say, this is Glenn and David reminding you that your marriage matters. We'll see you next week.